Today, we're going to dive into the story of one of history's most infamous dividing lines. It was a scar of concrete and wire that didn't just split a city, it split a country and really the entire world for almost 3 decades. We're talking, of course, about the Berlin Wall.
So picture this. You go to bed one night and you wake up the next morning to find your whole world has changed. Forever. For everyone living in Berlin, that morning was August 13th, 1961. It started out like any other day, but it would end with the city and its people just brutally torn apart.
I mean, can you imagine waking up to the sound of soldiers and construction crews literally tearing up the streets right outside your front door? Barbed wire barricades were popping up everywhere, cutting right through neighborhoods, separating families, splitting friends. Overnight, a line on a map became this brutal, physical reality.
But, a wall like this doesn't just appear out of thin air. Its foundations were actually laid years before, in the ashes of World War II. Now, this division of Germany, it was only supposed to be temporary, a joint effort to rebuild the nation, but that spirit of wartime alliance, it fell apart pretty fast, and it exposed this massive ideological rift between the victors.
And this is really the heart of the conflict. You had the Western powers who pictured a new Germany with a liberal, market-based democracy. And then you had the Soviet Union, which wanted to create this buffer zone of obedient communist nations, with Germany as a key part of that. These two visions were just completely, totally incompatible.
So what happens? The temporary division, it becomes permanent. In the West, you get the Federal Republic of Germany. In the East, the Soviets set up the German Democratic Republic, the GDR. And the border between them just hardened, becoming almost impossible to get across.
This division wasn't just happening in Germany, by the way. It became known as the Iron Curtain, a phrase that perfectly captured the complete separation of Eastern and Western Europe. It was a stark dividing line between two completely different worlds.
Okay, but this whole situation raises a really big question. If the border between East and West Germany was sealed shut, what on earth was going on with the old capital, Berlin? Because its situation was uniquely complicated.
You see, the city of Berlin was located deep inside East German territory. But, just like the rest of the country, the city itself was also divided up among the 4 allies. And this created this democratic enclave, West Berlin, which is basically an island of freedom and capitalism surrounded by a sea of communism. For millions of East Germans, it became a vital and pretty accessible gateway to the West. And that gateway, that island of freedom, created a massive, massive problem for the East German leadership. Their solution was as drastic as it was brutal. They decided to build a wall to stop the flood of people leaving.
So why were so many people leaving? Well, the contrast between East and West was just stark. In the East, you lived your life under the watchful eye of the Stasi, the infamous secret police. The economy was planned, stagnant. But in the West, you had higher salaries, all sorts of consumer goods, and maybe most important of all, you had personal freedom.
This is the number that absolutely terrified the East German government. 3.5 million.
That staggering number, 3.5 million, represented nearly a fifth of their entire population. It was this catastrophic brain drain. Doctors, engineers, teachers just pouring out of the country. It was crippling them. The regime knew its survival depended on stopping this exodus for good.
And the wall, it didn't just appear fully formed, it evolved. It started as just a simple barbed wire fence, but by 1965, massive concrete barricades went up. Then they added spike strips, guard dogs, even landmines. And finally, it became the infamous death strip, a 100-meter-wide gauntlet of sand and tripwires where guards and watchtowers had orders to shoot anyone who tried to cross.
But even a terrifying barrier like that couldn't extinguish the human desire for freedom. In fact, the story of the wall is also the story of these incredibly brave and ingenious attempts to get over, under, or through it.
People just refused to be trapped, and their ingenuity was just astonishing. Some people spent months secretly digging tunnels right under the feet of the guards. Others looked to the sky. They actually built homemade hot air balloons to try and float silently to freedom. And in one unbelievable act of defiance, a guy even crashed a stolen armored tank directly through the fortifications. The desire for freedom was just unstoppable. But all this defiance came at a terrible, terrible cost. While it's true that nearly 5,000 people made it to freedom, over 138 others paid the ultimate price. They died trying to escape, often shot in full view of people in the West who were just powerless to help them.
The wall, in a way, stabilized the East German economy by force, but it also became this global symbol of communist repression. And by the late 1980s, the tide of history was really starting to turn against it.
All across the Eastern Bloc, from Poland to Hungary, you had people demanding change. Huge demonstrations were calling for democracy, for the freedom to travel. The pressure on the East German government was just becoming unbearable.
And then came the night of November 9th, 1989. And you know what? The whole thing started with a mistake. A confused East German official accidentally announced on TV that travel restrictions would be lifted immediately. Well, hearing this, thousands of East Berliners just surged toward the border crossings. The guards were stunned, they hadn't gotten any new orders. Faced with this overwhelming, joyous crowd, they really had no choice but to open the gates. And what happened next was a night of just pure euphoria, as a city reunited and celebrated on top of the very wall that had divided it for so long.
The fall of the wall really was the beginning of the end. Less than a year later, in October of 1990, Germany was officially one country again. The Soviet Union itself would fall not long after that. The Cold War was over.
Today, you can still see pieces of the wall standing in Berlin. They're a memorial, a really stark reminder of the human cost of division. But you know, they're also a testament to this enduring truth, and it's this: the human spirit's desire for freedom is a force that's more powerful than any barrier of concrete and steel, and eventually, no wall can contain it.